Hello everyone, I'm Hugh and this is Warsim, the Realm of Aslona's exploration of the face generation system. So currently the game is able to produce 202 quadrillion different faces, split among 39 different face types and different races. There are additional modifications that can be rolled onto all of those that would send that number really astronomically higher, but we're not really going to count them. So the number is accurate, the 202 quadrillion. It's actually a little more than that, but I had to calculate it manually and it took a long ass time. So here we are. So we'll start off. I'm going to show you how to get to the system. Obviously, it's used in game, so even this character here next to the word Warsim, he's randomly generated, and if I type any number other than what's available on the option screen, I'll get another one. And I mean, each one that we've just seen is pretty much guaranteed never to be seen ever again. So this guy we're looking at right now, gone forever. And it's obviously it's gimmicky. I understand that. Like, it's not my primary game development achievement. It's not the main thing that's being sold as to the game, but it's something that I think definitely adds to it, knowing that pretty much everyone you encounter in your game is unique to you and will never be seen again anywhere else. And if you delete the game save, goodbye everyone who looks the way they do. So it's kind of interesting. So obviously you can get them in the game, but there's also quite an extensive extra screen here. So if we go to extras and then we go to random generators, there's quite a few here. We're going to go straight to the number 8, random face generators. So I'm just going to type that in. And now you'll see we've got a couple of pages because there's a lot of different ones here. So there's 3 pages and we'll work our way through and I'll show off all the different things the game has to offer. So the first one is the primary one. It's the one used mostly in the game. The most characters you'll encounter in general will be humans because your kingdom in the game is human. So there are 179 quadrillion human faces. It's monstrous, the amount of variation that's there. So this number here is generated live. So if I were to alter the files that contain these face systems, the number would change. Luckily, I don't have to calculate that manually because, my god. But yeah, so here we are. So the face generation system essentially works in slotting some lines together. So we take a text file that contains the top of a head part. Then we've got the forehead, the eyes, the nose and ears, the upper lip, the mouth, and the chin. And each of these is a separate line that is slapped together, and they all roughly will form a face together. So obviously, if I were to make an eye part that started here and ended here, it wouldn't fit very well. So it has to follow a sort of theme, but it's fairly easy to do when they're all lined up together, and I think I'm pretty good at it by now. So we'll skip through and see if we can see anything interesting. Variation at a certain point becomes basically hard to even tell the difference, but there are vast amounts of different faces available here. You'll see different types of hair, different chins, different teeth, different noses, different eyes, but they all look kind of similar. So that's the human faces. We'll bounce over to number 2 now, which is the orcs, and I'll have to just quickly figure this one out. So that is 62 trillion different orcs, I believe. And orcs are one of my favorite races. I like the way they look. And I think you get quite a bit more variation here. So you've got an orc with something on his head. I don't know whether that's a gem embedded in his head or an eye or something. It's got a wart. It's got a thick chin. The guy above him has a strange shaped box chin and a different set of teeth pointing out. If we skip again, we've got another one. This one's got some sort of hat, some sort of helmet thing on, and a beard. This one's got a weird star-shaped chin and just one tooth hanging down. So they do have like some variation that's pretty visible. We'll skip through a bunch. This one's got some strange ears and whatever that is on the top of his head. They all look fairly different in a sense. You can kind of tell that they're not, they each have their own personalities, I guess. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different orcs you can get, and the variation just goes on. And obviously, I mean, I've played this game for thousands of hours through game testing and things like that, so these faces all blend into me at this point. Like, I don't really see anything that ever catches me off guard, but I also drew them all myself. So I don't know what it's like from the perspective of a player, but the concept is cool as a developer. I really, really love procedural generation. It was how I really got into game development. I always wanted to get into game development, but I never planned to. And I just learned programming by making procedural generation systems, and eventually one of those ended up becoming a game. So here we are. So now we've got giants. They're They're not my favorite looking race. They actually used to look a lot different, but I've altered them a little bit. Not fantastic. They kind of look a bit goofy. And there's 36 billion of them, which relative to the face generation system is definitely one of the smaller numbers. However, it is still more than we've got humans, so that's pretty cool. Alright, goblins next. So goblins are difficult because their faces are smaller, so I had to add, I guess, a neck part instead of what would be normally the chin on a human. And I tried to vary the necks a little bit, so if you focus on them, you can see different kinds of necks and stuff, but really it's quite difficult. So there's not as much variation as there could be here. I think there are 30 trillion different goblins, so quite big, quite a large number, and they all sort of vary. I'm not a massive fan of the goblins personally, but you know, they're still cool. Then we got mermen, so these are sea folk, and there is only 4 billion of these. It's a very small number of faces relative to the system. You got the little fish eyes. I don't know what variation you have. So these ones, his face is sort of curving in, and this guy's face is sort of pointing out. You can kind of tell the differences, but again, they all follow a theme. They all blend with each other. The fact that they're colored differently really helps. Obviously, there's a lot of slashes and stuff like that involved in these ones, and the same sort of things. So that's all of your mermen. And then we've got liches. I really like liches. I like all the sort of skeletal creatures. So these guys, it was interesting developing this because unlike almost all of the other creatures, the face shape is really up to interpretation, which means that having different face parts all lining up in weird ways and missing parts, it allowed me to add a lot more variation in the shape that they would make. Even so, there is still only 1 billion of them, which relative to the game is pretty small. But who knows what can happen in the future. So if we'll skip through, see a couple of weird ones. So this one doesn't have a circlet thing on its head, and you can sort of vaguely make out its face. This one's got eye sockets, and they all form sort of sorry, decayed skulls, which I really like seeing, and the variation in them is more obvious, I think, than other races. Like each of these are fairly different. Like this one, for example, is not that similar to the one above. The one above doesn't even necessarily look like a skull unless you're looking at it, trying to make it seem that way, but I like it. So then we've got Cyclops. Again, not one of my favorites. They look like angry tomatoes, but it's cool. And there are 32 billion of these somehow. I don't know how they've got such variation because I don't remember spending a lot of time on it. But it's pretty good. So we're going to move on. So the next one is demons. Demons are quite big in the game, but still quite rare to see demonic characters. And their faces use a lot of chevrons. So we can skip through. You can see different kinds of noses, different kinds of teeth, different kinds of chins, different kind of head tops. And there's actually quite a large amount of these. Just have a look. There's 7 trillion different demons. So that's a huge number, really. I mean, relative to the game, again, it's kind of mid-level, really, for these races, but it's still up there. It's one of the better ones. Now we got lizardmen. So this is another one that I really struggled with because the lizardmen faces are small. So there's actually only 100 million possible lizardman faces, which is possibly... Oh, let's have a look. I think it's the 3rd or 4th smallest of all the races, which is quite bad. But it's only because I couldn't use certain layers very well. So they've gained these sort of neck pieces, but these small lizard faces don't take up the 7 slots so well. They're still good, but they take a while to load. Now we've got demigods. So demigods kind of got an overhaul a little while ago where I added the ability for them to have 1 eye, 3 eyes, multiple sets of ears, stuff like that, because I thought they're going to transcend what a human would look like and be a little different and weird. So there are 252 billion different demigods. And again, they follow a kind of theme. They do look fairly different-ish, but again, you can still see similarities from one to the next. But they're different enough, I suppose. And who's next? Dwarfs. So dwarves are just kind of like fat bearded men, I guess. So their faces are chunkier, They all have beards by default, as far as I can remember anyway, and their faces are a little more pudgy. And there are what's that number? 1 trillion. So that's quite a lot. Quite a lot of dwarves. 1 trillion dwarves. I mean, if you had 1 trillion dwarves on a mountain, it would have to be a pretty big damn mountain, to be fair. Alright, now elves. So elves are an interesting one. It was actually through the elf generator that I ended up making vampires, because I got a certain face in here and I was like, that looks like a vampire. And then extended a new generator based on a specific elf face. You'll see in a moment when we move on to vampires. But elves have sort of different kinds of noses, pointy ears, and there's not. It was difficult to variate them, so there's only 7 billion of those, but it's still interesting. So moving on now to vampires. So you'll see the face shape is similar-ish. I expanded on it a little bit more and tried to make them a little more unique. So the vampires always look a little more evil. They're kind of like freaky elves. And yeah, I gave them these little flicks like they're wearing some kind of coat or something. And how many of them are there? 1 billion. Okay. So moving on to the next, we got minotaurs. Not my favorite, but they're okay. And it's kind of hard to make big faces in the limited 7 slots, but I think I've managed to do it fairly well. And the variation here seems to be mainly the teeth difference. Then we got ogres. I do like ogres. Ogres are interesting. This guy looks content with life, and this guy looks content with having a lot of random teeth. And so these guys, kind of like the orcs, they have a decent variation to them. There are 1 trillion or 1.1 trillion different ogres. This one's kind of Shrek-like. So you can get all sorts of variation, different kinds of chins and shapes and things like that. I like seeing them. They're definitely one of my more favorite faces. And then we've got gnomes. So gnomes actually had an overhaul. They used to be different. They used to be even shorter faces, I believe, and even more hat. But I decided to dedicate just over half the face to a hat as opposed to more than that. So the faces are kind of squished and a little derpy looking. There are quite a lot of them. 332 billion different gnomes. This one doesn't have a beard. Yeah, they're kind of goofy. But yeah, that's the gnomes. So we're moving on to the second page now. We've got zombies, which is another one of those sort of undead that I like. And again, similar theme with the liches. Their faces are kind of malleable, so we can make different shapes that you'll see if we flick through a few here. And they all follow a semi-similar theme. Noses can be different. The eye shape generally is the same. They always have some sort of... They're not skeletons, there are eyes there, although some of them are rotted away. And you see these face shapes getting kind of out of hand. All sorts of different stuff. And there's quite a lot of these, to be honest. There are... What is that number? 7 trillion, I think. 7.7 trillion. So that's quite a lot, let's be honest. You'll never see any of these again that we've just seen. Although you'll see ones that look similar, I guess. So now we've got trolls. I do like trolls. They're big, beefy faces. There's not a ton of them relative to everything else, but they're pretty good. Big, beefy troll faces. I think there are 70 billion of them. So the next one is the ghost race face thing. I haven't actually included that in my calculation because, as you can see, there's nothing here. However, that is just my game playing tricks on you. So if you actually copy and pasted these slots, you'd have 2 faces appear in whatever you pasted it in. So what it actually does is, this number is just made up, but the ghost face generator uses human faces, the 179 quadrillion human faces. So 2 of those human faces are here, and if you were to copy them and paste them, you'd see them. But they're currently set to the same color as whatever the background is. And that is how they work in game as well. So if you get a Ghost Kingdom, you can actually see their faces, and there's also an artifact called the Seer Stone. I can't remember where you get it from, but you can use that to see the unseeable, including ghosts. But they don't count towards the 202 quadrillion figure. They essentially add 0 to it. Accidentally back pasted some of the parts there, but here we go. Okay, so now we got ents, these little tree people. So I quite like these. And there's a fair number of them as well, 776 billion different tree men. So they got different kinds of tree or teeth, different kinds of eyes. Sometimes they've got these little bits in them. But again, they're fairly basic, little twigs hanging off the edge. They follow a similar theme. So the variation here isn't as huge as the number might indicate, but that's fine. Then we've got mushroom men, or shroomlings as they were recently renamed. And it's not my proudest, because they don't look fantastic, but it does the job. And there are 237 million of these, so one of the smallest ones. But the one that we got next is actually the worst, I believe, the golem generator. There are 7 million of these, so you see it took a little while to generate. That number is baby compared to the stuff we've been seeing that's pushing all the way out here. And again, golems aren't my favorite. I don't like them. There's not much, I don't know, I just don't like the blockiness of the faces, but it's cool. You know, we don't see them very often. Then we got nulls. So this was designed by one of the game's players. He designed a sample face, and then I built as much variation of each of the parts he provided as possible, which has given us 109 billion different null faces. So they're kind of like dog-like heads. Who have we got next? Witches. So this is another one provided by a player, and I just expanded on it. And there's quite a lot of these as well. They're not my favorite, because they do look kind of goofy, but witches aren't meant to be pretty, to be fair. Then we've got dryads. So there's a little variation here. This is another player provided one, kind of like forest folk. And we got harpies. This is another player provided one, so you can tell at this point in the game development I was getting sent a lot of fill-ins for some races I had in the game that didn't have faces at the time, and thankfully people stepped forward and came up with them, because I was hitting a bit of a writer's block trying to come up with these. Obviously trying to draw thousands and thousands of different ASCII face parts can definitely wear on a man's soul, if you know what I'm saying. I like harpies. I like their faces. They're nice and compact, and it's kind of difficult to get the hair right, because obviously it has to follow the same theme all the way down, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. If it were possible to have a nose part that didn't have hair on it, then you just have a random cutout and then hair carrying on here and here. So that's the problem with the face generator, and that is actually one of the main reasons I've struggled adding female faces to the game for the time being, because one of the most obvious things to add to standard female faces is long hair, but it would all be the same long hair or similar themed long hair to fit it. But I will try it at some point. Hopefully we'll get some nice, more feminine face generation done for races like the humans and the orcs and goblins and such. Now we got, who's next? Kobolds. So again, another player provided one, and I like the complexity of the kobold faces, to be honest. Let me just double check how many of these there are. Kobolds. So there are 3 billion of these, so that's a fair number. And yeah, moving on. Trows. I believe this was also a player provided one, and I like how creepy these guys look. When I see a trow face, it kind of makes me, I don't know, they look deranged and strange and freaky, and I don't like them. But I like the face. I like what it can bring across. So now we've got one that's another one of the biggest ones. This is the number 2 largest face generator, and this is mutants. So mutants essentially are human faces. So the difference is that mutants have a different eye part and a color differently, but all the other parts use the same things as the human faces. So the variation is so big because there's already so many parts already made, and it literally just adds its own eye part. I know that's kind of cheeky, but these are different faces. They do look different. Essentially, it's just 3-eyed humans. But here we go. Next, we've got Cthulhu, which is a similar thing again, except instead of replacing the eyes of a human, it replaces the bottom 3 mouth parts. So it's got a kind of human upper part, and then these creepy little lower things. And they vary. It was somewhat difficult, because again, there has to be a flowing theme here, but I managed to get it working as best I could. So you'll notice their mouths kind of all follow a similar theme, but they look a little different. There's a little variation in how they laid out and how the mouth works and stuff. Spooky. And this is, I think, 23 trillion different Cthulhu faces. Then we've got abominations. Again, not one of my favorites. These are just like fat slime heads. And there's not a lot of them either. There's five 8.5 billion, I think. So relative to the generator, again, not that many. But yeah, they're not my favorite. And then we've got underlings. I think I made these myself, but I don't remember it. It's just a random race added to the game with a distinct face. They kind of look like little Hellboys. It's the best way I think of them. And they're just kind of like these weird creatures from the underworld. And then next page, so we've got the last few. So we've got gruntkin. This is a race that was inspired by the name of one of the mystical creatures from Game of Thrones. I thought it was kind of funny. So I just made a random face. And these guys are goofy. There's not a massive amount of them. And they're not my favorite, but it's kind of fun. And then we've got Esphanti, which is essentially elephant people. And again, they're not like my favorite, but I do like that they're fairly different to basically everything else. And I shared a picture of one of these online once, and someone said they look like a pair of thighs with something kind of maybe rude in the middle, or a pair of lungs and loads of other things. So I don't know. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and to me this looks like some kind of creepy elephant. But hey, we're all different. Then we've got protofolk, which I quite like. These are these sort of savage pre-human people. And there are 1.4 billion of these. So again, pretty tiny relative to the game. And you can kind of see the differences on their faces. They have different sort of structures a little bit. Then we've got ski rocks, which is another random race that I added. These are like these little weird green three-eyed sharp teeth dog things. And there's, again, another small number of these, 126 million, which is, I believe, one of the smallest. And then coming up next, we've got one which was a branch off. This is how orcs used to look like when the game was first in development. And I wanted to get rid of the old orc face generator, and I redid it quite differently for the orcs that we're using now. So I just renamed these guys and gave them a K instead of a C, and then classed as a slightly different race. I know that's kind of cheap, but I didn't want to get rid of it too much. So we've got two more left. We've got Lug Rockies, which is another random race I made. And this just came from doodling a weird face. And then I was like, okay, let's make as many variations as possible. So we've got 74 million of them. And then we've got Halflings, which, again, they're not one of my favorites, but they're okay. And there's 7.1 billion of those. So that is a delve into the face generator. That's actually not really where it ends. I can't sort of show off all of the different possible variations of those faces, but it is possible for random races that are generated in the game. Obviously, this is just like the base face system, but they can be any different color depending on what their race is. They can have longer necks, longer heads. They can be children, so they'll have shrunk faces. They can be deformed, missing random face parts. They can be eyeless, so they'll be missing the eye part. And any mixture of those things. And I've seen some pretty weird ones, which frequently catch me off guard. So there's a lot more to see than what has been shown here, but it's just a delve into the system. Obviously, again, to reiterate, 202 quadrillion faces is a gimmick. Beyond the point of anything other than a few 100,000, you're never, ever, ever going to see more than 1% of them between everybody who's ever played the game and ever will. I think it would probably take the entire human race a few decades of consistently looking at every face multiple a second to see all that's available. And so it's really just kind of a flex to push these numbers around. But it's a fun flex, and it is kind of interesting to think of these things as possible, and to know that all of the races and all of the creatures that you're seeing in the game and all these different faces are very unique to you. And if you delete your game world, all those people, their faces are gone forever. They'll never be seen again. It's virtually impossible, especially for things like humans. Maybe less so for races like Lug Rockies or the golems or whatever, but pretty much impossible. So anyway, that's been a delve into Warsim's face generation system. I hope it's been insightful. If there's any questions anyone's got or anything of that sort, feel free to message me here on Reddit, on Steam, or wherever else. The game is Warsim, the Realm of Aslona. It's on Steam and itch.io currently, and it's not very expensive. I've worked on it for a couple of years. There's a lot of stuff in here. The face generation system is one of many, 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 many features and focuses of the game, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. So thanks for watching, guys. Catch you next time.